Good morning, dear learners. Welcome to teaching learning session. Today we'll discuss about perceptions of consumer behavior, and this perception plays a very important role in consumer behavior. What is perception? What do you understand by the term perception? Perception is nothing but the process of developing a viewpoint, right? My perception towards something, right? My perception towards some event, right? It's my viewpoint, right? It is nothing but the viewpoint, and the viewpoint of consumer towards the product or the services actually plays a very important role. If the perception is positive, if the consumer's perception is positive towards the product or the services, right, it impacts in a positive way, right? It can increase the sales or can increase the demand of product or the services, right? The study of consumer perception is important for the marketers, right? Why it is very important? Because on the perception of that, marketer can decide their product and the services, right? It is important for the marketer to know what the consumer wants, right? If you create your product and the services as per the needs and wants of the consumer, marketer or the organization will get the positive response for that service or product, right? So this consumer perception plays a very important role for marketers, as the buying decisions are not made on the basis of objective reality, but on the basis of perception of that reality that consumers hold in their mind, right? In our last lecture we discussed about the decision making process, right? Decision making process of the consumer before purchasing any product, right? In that decision making process, that perception plays a very important role. In our last lecture we discussed that if someone wants to purchase or avail some type of the services, then the external determinants as well as internal determinants plays very important role. If some external determinants gives a negative feedback about that product or the services, then it creates a negative type of a perception for that particular product or the services to the consumer, right? So on the basis of that perception, the consumer actually makes the purchasing decisions. That's why it is very important for the marketer to understand the perception of an individual, so accordingly they can develop the product or the services as per the requirement of the consumer. This is the consumer perception process, right? Includes the stimuli or sensory inputs. We get the inputs from the various sources, external sources like the source could be your colleague, the source could be your friend, the source could be culture, the source could be advertisements. So there are some external stimuli, right? And this leads to the exposure. This exposure leads to the attention and the interpretation, right? And interpretation, when we interpret something, we associate meaning to that thing, and with that meaning we respond for that particular thing or the service or the product, and it creates our perceptions, right? So this stimuli exposes us to these things. How it exposes that? It provides us the information. We get the exposure. Now we have the information about the product or the services, and with that it leads to the attention, and this attention leads to the interpretation, right? This exposure, right? We interpret those information which we get from the external stimuli, and with interpretation we attach meaning to those interpretation, and with that meaning, accordingly as per the meaning we respond. And this response, we can have a negative attitude or a perception or a positive perception or attitude for something, right? So external stimuli plays a very important role. In the first place, only a very small number of stimuli in our environment are ever noticed. Of these, even a smaller amount is attended to, and the stimuli do enter the consciousness might not be processed objectively. The meaning of stimulus is interpreted by the individual who is influenced by his or her unique bias, needs, and experience, and all this leads to the formation of perception. This is what I have explained you, right? Sensory system. The external stimuli or sensory input can be received from the number of sources, right? This sensory inputs or the stimuli, we receive it from the various sources. The input picked up from our five senses constitutes the raw data or sensation that generates many types of the responses. Sensory data from the external environment, like at time we hear something, right, from someone, right, or through advertisements or through other stimuli, it generate an internal sensory stimuli. This external stimuli leads to the internal stimuli. It actually generates the internal stimuli, and this sensory stimuli or this sensory input evokes historic imagery in which events that actually occurred are recalled, and the data that we receive from our sensory system determine how we respond to the product. See, this we get the response, we get the information from the sensory stimuli. Sensory stimuli could be radio, could be television, could be colleague, could be friends, could be family, anyone. This leads to the internal stimuli. Internal stimuli is our needs, our biasness, our viewpoint, right? So it invokes. So all this invokes the historic imagery in events that actually occurred are recalled, and the data we respond from our sensory system determine how we respond to that product, right? Vision. Marketers rely heavily on the visual elements in the advertising, store design, and packaging because these stimuli impacts, right, the perception of an individual. At times we get attracted towards the product because of the packaging, because of the design. So marketer rely heavily on the visual elements, right? Meanings are communicated on visual channels to the product size, styling, brightness, distinctiveness from the competitors, right? This visual stimuli plays a very, very important role, and these meanings are communicated to the visual channels, to the product size, packaging, and other things. Color is one of the most potential or potent aspect of visual communication. Colors are rich in symbolic value and the cultural meaning. Even the color plays a very important role in creating the perception, right? And because color have some symbolic value and the cultural values. So, stimuli, external stimuli as well as our internal stimuli plays a very important role. Stimuli like when we hear something, right? It makes our perception. Vision stimuli, right, it impacts our perception, right? Even the color impacts our perception. Then the smell. Odor can stir emotions or create a calming feeling. They can invoke memories or relieve stress, right? So suppose if we passes if we are going somewhere and a restaurant, we passes a through a restaurant, right? It could that smell of food or some beverage or a coffee could evoke our stimuli. It can create a perception that we need it, or I would like to have something from this cafeteria or from this restaurant because our smell stimuli evokes our perceptions or feelings, right? So order can steer the emotions and create emotions or create a feeling, right? They can evoke the memories or relieve the stress. Again, this sound, music and sound also plays an important role in marketing. Many aspects of sound may affect people's feelings and behaviors. Effect of background music on the mood and influence of speaking rate on the attitude change and message comprehension. So even sound plays a very important role. The background music or influence of speaking rate, or at which rate one is speaking, that influence of speaking rate on the attitude change. That speaking rate or the background music can change the attitude and message comprehension. So sound even plays a very important role. Then the touch. Senses to touch plays an important role in consumer perceptions, evaluation, and decision making of a product. Obviously, when we can feel and touch something, then it creates a perception. Suppose if we want to buy some t-shirt or something, if we are able to touch that, we can feel that that cloth is good or not, right? Touch plays an important role. That's why it plays a very important role in decision making of a product, right? Then the taste again plays a very important role in creation of the perceptions, right? Taste, suppose specifically in case of the service, that is the hotel industry, the taste plays a very important role, right? Learning and memory. What is the concept of learning? Learning refers to the permanent change in behavior that is caused by experience. So perception is what? Perception is a viewpoint, right? And the stimuli plays a very important role in creation of perception, right? Now, what is learning? Learning, it refers to a relatively permanent change in the behavior that is caused by the experience, a change in behavior. Why? Because of the experiences, that is learning, right? Suppose if we have a bad experience, we usually say that I learned my lesson, right? Or this experience has, because of this experience, I learned many things which I was not aware of, right? So learning is a relatively permanent change in the behavior that is caused by the experience. A more detailed definition of learning is when it is viewed as a process in which behavior capabilities are changed as a result of experience, provided by the change cannot be accounted for or by native response tendencies, maturation, or temporary change of organism due to fatigue, drug, or any other temporary factor, right? So what is this? The actual definition or the elaborated definition of learning is: the learning is a process in which behavioral capabilities are changed as a result of experience, provided the change cannot be accounted for the native response tendencies, maturation or temporary state of the organism due to fatigue, drugs, or any other temporary factor. That is, the change could not be because of any temporary factor, right? The change in the behavior should be because of the experiences, and these experiences, right, cannot be accounted for the uh, are tendencies that are because of fatigue or drugs or other temporary factors. So change in the behavior that is caused by the experiences, provided that experiences should not be temporary, or should not be temporary, or that change should not be a temporary, or that those experiences should not be because of tiredness, fatigue, drugs, or any other thing. The key word of definition are the process, behavior capabilities, and an enduring change. Thus, learning is not an act, it is not the behavior, but the capabilities to behave and the permanency of change through the experience. So, what is learning? In short, what is learning? That is capabilities to behave, and permanency of change through the experience. Change in the behavior because of experiences, or a permanent change in the behavior because of the experiences, is known as learning. There are various theories of learning. First theory of learning is classical conditioning theory, right? Very common theory. Classical conditioning occurs when a stimulus that elicits a response is paired with another stimulus that initially does not elicit a response on its own, right? See, classical conditioning theory, that is, it occurs when some stimulus evokes a response, right? And this stimulus is paired with another stimulus, and that another stimulus was initially were this that another stimulus initially was not able to evoke a response on its own. That is, the stimulus which is able to evoke a response is paired with some stimulus that some another stimulus that was initially not able to evoke the response on its own, right? Over the time, the second stimulus causes a similar response because it is associated with the first stimulus. See, there is a first stimulus which is capable to evoke a response, right? And this first stimulus is paired with the second stimulus, and this second stimulus was not able to evoke the response, right, on its own. But now the second stimulus is able to evoke the similar response because it is associated with the first stimulus. And this phenomenon was first demonstrated on the dogs by Ivan Pavlov, a Russian psychologist doing a research on the digestion in animals. Right? Pavlov conducted a number of conditioning trials by pairing a neutral stimulus, a bell, with a stimulus known to cause a salivation response in dogs. The powder was an unconditioned stimulus because it was naturally capable of causing a response. Over the time, the bell became a conditioning stimulus. Right. So this experiment was conducted by the Pavlov, a Russian scientist who was doing an experiments on the digestion of the animals, right? What Pavlov did, the Pavlov conducted a number of conditioning trials by pairing a neutral stimulus. A neutral stimulus was a bell, right? This bell stimulus was paired with stimulus known to cause a salivation response in the dogs. It was paired with various other types of the responses. The powder was an unconditioned stimulus because it was naturally capable of causing a response, and that powder was this. Over a period of time, that bell became the unconditional response. That unconditional response was this. The bell was the response. The bell was the neutral response, second type of a stimulus, right? It did not initially cause salivation, but the dogs learned to associate the bell with the meat powder and began to salivate at the sound of bell only. See, what the Pavlov did was he used the bell as as a neutral stimulus. What he did, he rang the bell, and the bell was not able to evoke that salivation in dogs. And when he associated that bell with the meat powder, then on the ring of that bell, right, that dogs began to salivate on the sound of the bell, right? Firstly, on the sound of the bell was not able to make the dogs salivate, right? Then again, then this bell was associated with another stimulus. That another stimulus was the meat powder, right? And meat powder was conditioned stimulus, and this meat powder then made this neutral stimulus, that is the bell, as a conditioned stimulus. Then on the sound of the bell, even the sound of the bell used to make those dogs salivate. Even the credit card becomes a conditioned cue that triggers a greater spending, especially since it is a stimulus that is present only a situation where consumers are spending money. Right. So this conditioning stimulus theory, as per the classical conditioning stimulus theory, that there are there are certain stimuli which actually are capable enough to evoke response, and these stimulus at times can make non-responding stimulus also the responsive or conditioned stimulus. The some important principle of classic conditioning of great use to the marketers, like repetition. Conditioning effects are more likely to occur after conditioned stimuli have been paired a number of times. Repeated exposures increases the strength of stimulus response association and prevent the decay of these association in memory. So as per this theory, that the lesson for the marketer is that the repetition of the stimulus, right, or repeated exposure increases the strength of stimulus. The more you exposes the consumer to the stimulus, the response will be more. The stimulus response association will be more and will prevent the decay of the association in the memory. So the repeated exposure of the strength of stimulus response association and prevent the decay of these association in the memory. Many classic advertising campaign consist of the product slogan that may have been repeated so many times that are attached in the consumer's mind. That is like 2 minutes noodles, right? So everyone knows now. Maggie means 2 minutes noodle. Choti choti book, 2 minutes, right? All these are the this choti si book. Again, the first thing which comes in mind is Maggie, right? Or 2 minute noodles means that specific product. So this many so marketer use this theory, right, to in their campaign, in their advertising campaign, right, that what they did in their advertising campaign. The advertising campaign consists of the product slogan that have been repeated so many times. When you repeat a thing so many times, right, naturally it gets fixed up in consumer's mind somewhere unknowingly. That comes in the mind of the consumer whenever they hear something, right? So that product comes in the mind of the consumer. Generalization. Stimulus generalization refers to the tendency of stimuli to evoke similar conditioned responses. For example, Pavlov noticed in subsequent study that his dogs would sometimes salivate when they hear the noises that would resemble a bell. So people react to other similar stimuli in much way they respond to the original stimuli, right? So marketer use this concept, create and sell me too type of product with similar sounding names or packaging or coloring very close to the market leaders, right? So as per this, the stimuli generalization is like what Pavlov noticed, that whenever his dog um, um, whenever his dog heard the same type of a sound which resembled the bell, right, the dog would sometimes salivate, right? So this the people react to other similar stimuli in much in the same way they respond to the original stimuli. That is how the marketer use this concept, right? The marketer use this concept by making a similar type of a product with similar sounding names, or packaging, or coloring, or um, or any other thing which is similar to the actual stimuli or the original stimuli, right? Then stimulus discrimination occurs when the stimulus similar to a conditioned stimulus is not followed by unconditioned stimulus. When this happens, reactions are weakened and will soon disappear. Part of learning process involve making a response to some stimuli but not to other similar stimuli. Manufacturer of a well-established brand commonly urge consumer not to buy cheap imitations because the result will not be what they expect, even seeking to provide cues to distinguish the original brand from the cheap copies. So, for the marketers, it is important to discriminate between the stimulus, that is the conditioned stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus. And how the marketer can do this, right? By making the consumer aware about their product, and by providing the cues how they can distinguish between the original brand and the cheap copies, right? So this was the classical conditioning theory, right? And how classical conditioning, how the marketer can apply the classical conditioning theory, right? In marketing, we discussed about this. Now the cognitive learning theory. What is cognitive learning theory? Cognitive learning explain learning as a result of mental processes. So cognitive learning is what? It is related to the mental processes. Explains the learning as a result of mental processes. When we learn something as a result of mental process. In contrast to the behavioral theories of learning, cognitive learning theory stresses the importance of internal mental process. This perspective views people as a problem solver who actively use information from the world around them to master their environment. Supporter of this viewpoint also stresses the role of creativity and insight during the learning process. The cognitive theory explanation of learning are strongly based on the memory. There are two complex issues of learning. First is, see, what is cognitive learning theory? Cognitive learning theory is related to learning as a result of mental process, right? Rather than this cognitive learning perspective, view the problem solver who uses the information from the world, right? And it includes the creativity and insight during the learning process. And there are the two complex issues of learning. The issue of consciousness. Many modern theorists are beginning to regard some instances of conditioning as a cognitive process, especially where the expectations are found about linkage between stimuli and the response. Studies using masking effect, where it is difficult for the subject to learn conditioned stimuli or unconditioned stimuli association, show a substantial reduction in conditioning, right? Then observational learning is a process of learning by watching the behavior of others. See, there are these issues related to the consciousness, right? See, there are many studies which mask the effect where it was difficult for subject to learn the conditioned stimuli and the unconditioned stimuli association. Is there any? It was difficult for the subject to relate between the condition and the unconditioned stimuli. This shows a substantial reduction in conditioning. So this has reduced the conditioning, right? And then comes the observational learning, and this observational learning is a process by watching the behavior of others, right? There are the four processes of observational learning: attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. These are the four processes of observation. What is attention? To learn, the observer must pay attention to something in the environment. It means the observer is getting the information or gaining the information through observation from the environment. They must notice the model and the behavior occurring. Attention level can vary based on the characteristic of model and the environment, including the model's degree of likeness and observer's current mood. Attention could be that the observation of an individuals of all individual could be vary, and many factors could be responsible for this for this variation in the attention. In humans, it is likely the observer will pay attention to the behavior of models that are of high status, talented, intelligent, or similar to the observer in any way. So there are many factors which impacts the attention of the observer. Right. Then attention is what? Attention is observing something, and that observer is getting information or from the environment, and this observation or attention level, or you can say information gathering, vary from individual to individual, and many factors impacts the attention of the observer. After attention comes the retention. Simple attention is not enough to learn a new behavior. The observer must also retain and remember the behavior at later time. To increase the chances of retention, the observer must structure the information in an easy to remember format. Only observation, only gathering information is not uh, okay, but it is very important to retain that information, and to retain that information for later use, it is required that the observer should structure the information in easy to remember format. How will he remember that? After retaining that information comes the reproduction. The behavior is remembered, but it can it be performed in real life? Reproduction is a process where the observer must be able to physically perform the behavior in the real world. So the observer has gathered the information, retained that information in a structured form. Now it is important to perform the behavior in the real world, and after gaining the attention and retaining the information, it is important to reproduce that attention or reproduce that behavior in the real world. Then comes the motivation. All learning requires some degree of personal motivation. For observational learning, the observer must be motivated to produce the desired behavior. This motivation is intrinsic to the observer. Other times, motivation can comes from the external reinforcement, like rewards and the punishments. Right. So then comes the motivation. Why should I do this? So motivation could be a reason for one's action. Right. This reason could be extrinsic or as well as intrinsic. So when you learn something through observing others, right, it comes under the cognitive learning, when you learn through the mental processes, and this includes your mental processes. You observe someone, right, that the subject is observing someone, then they are retaining that information, and then they are reproducing that information. They are using their brains and mental processes going in, and then something is motivating them to reproduce that, or so doing or behaving in that manner. Memory, structure and functioning. Memory involves a process of acquiring information and storing it over a time so that it will be available when needed. There are three distinct memory system: sensory memory, short-term memory, and the long-term memory. And each plays a processing a brand related information. So memory is what? Memory is acquiring information and storing it over a time so that it can be available whenever it is needed, right? So there are three distinct memory systems. The first is sensory memory, then the short time memory, and the long time memory, and each plays a role in brand related information. What is sensory memory? The sensory memory permits the storage of information we receive from our senses. The storage is very temporary and it lasts couple of seconds at most. It would be sufficient to allow a person to determine if he or she should investigate further. If the information is retained for further processing, it passes through an attentional gate and is transferred to the short-term memory. See, the sensory memory is what? The sensory memory is related to our senses, right? It permits the storage of information that we receive from our senses. Suppose if we touch something and if then we feel like this product is the quality of this product is good or not, right? And this storage is temporary; it lasts for a couple of seconds. And suppose if that couple of seconds would be sufficient to allow a person to determine if he or she should investigate further. If by touching something I feel like yes, the quality is good, and if I would like to know investigate further about that product, right? So this is because of that sensory memory. And if information is retained and and if that information is retained for further processing, it passes through an attentional gate and is transferred to the short-term memory. Suppose if I touched something and I felt like that quality is not that good, then that memory is sensory type of a memory and it lasts for a couple of seconds. I will not think about it. And by touching the second situation could be by touching, if I feel like that the product is good, the quality is good, and then I would like to make further inquiries about that product or investigation about that product, then this information is retained for further processing and it passes through an attentional gate because that product has gained my attention and it can be transferred to the short term memory, right? Then from sensory memory, it transferred to the short-term memory. What is short-term memory? Short-term memory stores the information for a limited time period and its capacity is limited. Similar to a computer, this system can be related as the working memory. It holds the information we are currently processing. Where verbal input may be stored or stored acoustically or semantically, right? This information is stored by combining a small piece into a larger one in the process known as chunking. Short type memory, in short, what is short time memory? Short time memory is again for a limited time period and it has a limited capacity, right? It is like a RAM of a computer, right? Then the long-term memory is that system that allows us to retain the information for a longer period of time, right? In order for information to enter into the long-term memory from a short-term memory, elaborate rehearsal is required. Elaboration rehearsals are required, and this involves thinking about the meaning of stimulus and relating it to other information related to the already there in the memory. Marketers sometimes assist in the process by devising catchy slogan and jingles that consumers repeat on their own, right? So memory is that memory which in which the senses plays a very important role. From if then sensory memory can lead to the short term memory is again for a shorter duration of a time, right? For a shorter duration of a time, then the short-term memory can enter into the long-term memory, right? And for this for this information to enter into the long term memory from the short term memory, elaborate rehearsal is required, right? And elaborate rehearsal is required, and that's how, and this is what the marketer use. This is how the marketer use this concept, by using those jingles or slogans which are very attractive or catchy, and they repeat those jingles or slogans over and over again. They rehearse, they make those jingles and slogans like that. The consumer repeat on their own. They may, or in another words, the marketer make those slogans and jingles very catchy and attractive, so that the consumer can repeat those slogans or jingles on their own. And to do so, the marketer frequently shows those things, or shows those jingles or product or slogans to the consumers again and again over a shorter period of time, right? So these are the learning processes, and these plays a very important role, and the marketer use these concepts very wisely, right? Attitude and attitude change. What is attitude? Attitude is nothing but the learned predisposition to predisposition to respond in consistently favorable and unfavorable manner with respect to given stimuli. What is attitude? Attitude is learned predispositions, right? What we have learned to respond to a consistently favorable or unfavorable manner with response to the stimuli. How one respond to the stimuli in a favorable way or unfavorable way. Attitude is relatively enduring organization of interrelated beliefs that describes, evaluate, and advocate action with respect to an object or situation, right? What is attitude? It is nothing but the learned predispositions to respond in a constantly favorable or unfavorable manner with respect to the stimuli. And this attitude is actually enduring organization of various interrelated beliefs that evaluate and advocate the action with respect to object or the situation. The first is that attitude is not transient feeling, but represents an enduring feeling or evaluation. It derives its genesis and strengths from variety of sources of information, including perception and experiences. So, this attitude, the perception and experiences plays a very important role in formation of attitude. It signals about the likely course of action by the consumers, right? So attitude plays a very important role in marketing because it signals about a likely course of action by the consumer. What could be the consumer's action? It signals about the likely course of action by the consumer. And attitude is the product of learning and is not sometimes inherited or inborn. Attitude is also a replacement term for describing a belief system of a person. So, what is attitude? Attitude is a learned predispositions, right? To learn predisposition to respond in a favorable or unfavorable manner, right, with respect to the stimuli, right? And this attitude. This perception and experience plays an important role in formation of attitude, and this attitude signals about the consumer behavior or the actions of the consumer, and the attitude is the product of learning and is not sometimes inherited or inborn. That this learning plays a very important role in attitude, right? attitude and the consumer decision making, and the consumer receives a variety of marketing communication about what they should buy and what they should not buy, right? And we get various type of the communication from various sources. Various stimuli are there, right? On the basis of input received from the various sources, consumer develop a specific their assessment about the brand and about the product or other brands. The brand and the assessment of the brand, and better known as a brand image. They create a the consumer, they develop a brand image, right? And a brand image helps the consumer in believing which brand is more likely to have a particular benefit or a feature, right? And it should be that these brand beliefs are based on the consumer perception that may sometimes be at variance with reality. See, this consumer receives a various type of marketing communication from various stimuli, right? What to buy and what not to buy, right? On the basis of input from the various sources, consumer creates a brand image, right? And brand image is what? The brand image is actually the product attribute, right? Brand image is what are the benefits of the product or the attributes of the product, and this belief uh, whether to this belief about the product attributes which consumer has gained from the external stimuli, right? That could vary from the reality, and actually it is because it is based on the consumer perception, right? So the brand image is actually based on the consumer perception, and consumer makes the perception on the basis of the external stimuli or the feedback which he received from the various sources, and on the day on the basis of these feedback, the consumer forms a brand image, right? uh, an attitude consists of three constituents, or there are the three components of the attitude: the affective component, the cognitive component, and the cognitive component of the attitude, right? Actually, attitude, actually, there are the three components of the attitude. The cognitive component of the attitude. Cognitive component is associated with the perception. The affective component of the attitude. The affective component is actually related to the emotions, right? Favorable or unfavorable. And the cognitive component, as per the cognitive and affective component, consumers start behaving. That is known as the cognitive component of the attitude. The functions of consumer attitude. What are the functions of consumer attitude? The first function is the utilitarian function. Consumers' attitude fulfill a utilitarian function as they guide consumer in achieving their desired needs. Right? So the function of attitude is utilitarian function because it helps in fulfilling the desired needs of the consumer. Then the ego defensive function of the attitude. This function protects the consumer against the internal and external anxiety and the environment, right? The ego defensive function. The value expressive function of the consumer or function, often consumer uses their attitude as an express their values and the self concept. So, see, the functions of the consumer attitude, there are the functions: the utilitarian function, the ego defensive function, and the expressive function. See, attitude, one important aspect of attitude is a dynamic concept. It is not static. Attitude changes with the experience because we make our attitude on the basis of our experience. It changes with the time, it changes with the experience. It means it changes with the situations, it changes with the experience. Suppose if someone has a perception, if someone has a brand image that that product is not good, and with the experience, because of some compulsion, he that consumer purchased that product, and his experience with that product might be good, and then it would change the perception, the brand image of that consumer. So it is a dynamic concept. Attitude is not a static concept. Experience and times plays a very important role in attitude formation, right? There are various factors actually which plays a very important role in formation of attitude. Attitude is what? The predispositions, all right, or perception. It also includes the perception. So various factors plays a very important role in formation of attitude, right? First factor is here family. Family plays a very important role in formation of consumer attitude, right? More or less we get the information from the family, right? We have a similar type of perceptions, right? All the family members have more or less similar type of a perception, and this attitude, the family plays a very important role in formation of attitude. The second important factor which plays a very important role in formation of attitude is education, right? Education plays a very important role in formation of attitude. Consumer, the more educated or knowledgeable the consumer is, more will be able to understand the attributes in detail and could be able to compare and analyze the information in a concrete way. Then friends plays a very important role in formation of attitude. Society plays a very important role in formation of attitude, and this society plays actually plays a very important role in consumers' attitude, right? Because our culture impacts the consumer's attitude. What is acceptable in the culture? Normally, consumer prefer to buy that product only. Then media plays a very important role in formation of consumer attitude, right? When we see the advertisements about a product, that is how the marketer creates a brand, right? Media, when we see the advertisements in the print media, audio visual media, it impacts the attitude of the consumer. So media plays a very important role in formation of attitude. Then again, the occupation plays a very important role in formation of consumer attitude. Actually, that the occupation impacts the attitude of the consumer. Then the economic status of the consumer, or the economic status impacts the attitude of the consumer. I might not like some brand, or I have certain uh, uh, notions or certain preconception about the brand because of the economic conditions, and with the change in the economic conditions, the attitude of the consumer can change. So economic conditions plays a very important role in consumers attitude, right? Other factors like colleagues, right? Or age or demographic factors plays a very important role in formation of attitude, like age, income, right? As per the age, our consumers attitude changes, right? Availability of the product changes the attitude of the consumers. So the attitude actually, all these factors impacts the attitude of the product, right? In our next lecture, we'll start with personality and self-concept, right? That's all for today. Thank you very much. Namaskar.